Hello everyone. Welcome to Forging Beyond, creating non-standard Forged in the Dark games. I should mute the stream. There we go. Uh, my name's Allie Bush and I'll be your panel moderator today. And joining me are Andrew Dills and Brandon O'Brien. I'll do my intro first. I already said my name. I use she, they pronouns. I found myself making tabletop games kind of out of nowhere. And the Fortune of the Dark game that I'm currently working the most on is called Heist, Get Rich or Die Trying, a one-shot game that removes most of the mechanics from Blades. So, Andrew, tell us about your game.
I'm Andrew. He's they, them pronouns, and my game is called Girl by Moonlight. It's sort of a multi-subgenre magical girl RPG with an emphasis on tragedy and heroic struggling and overcoming these kinds of things. And in terms of how I would position it within like the Blades design space, it seeks to extend a lot of the kind of interoperability of the elements and mechanics within the game, and kind of take some of those ideas to their what I see as some of their logical conclusions around how much you can fit into one game or how many different modes of play you can kind of adapt a given game element to accommodate.
And Brandon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brandon O'Brien. Pronouns he, him, or they, them. I'm a writer, poet, and game designer from Trinidad and Tobago. Currently working on my own Fortune in the Dark game, Sound Clash, which I describe as a game of music, magic, and sticking it to the industry. Which is what if you took most of the guts of Blades in the Dark and then just covered it in Gem and the Holograms? So that's what I'm working on right now.
Right. So, one of the big things we have to talk about is what really sets our games apart from Blades, which we went into a little bit, but Andrew, if you could dive into it a little bit deeper, what really makes it not Bladesy? That sounds really weird to say.
Yeah, so real quick to talk about Blades in the Dark itself and what it's about, right? It's crime fiction. It's about gaining, your like increasing your influence and power and wealth. It's about getting around a deeply oppressive and rigidly organized, corrupt society. And so, in a lot of ways, Girl by Moonlight is still about. It still has some of that same direction of play of like being an underdog, of being kind of on the outs of society, but rather than this kind of economic or legal kind of ouster, it focuses on being, someone with like of a queer identity or who embodies things that society doesn't want to permit to exist within it, and rather than trying to be about it's not about getting mine in Girl by Moonlight in the way it would be in Blades. Instead, it's about the kind of revolutionary character of some of those ideas, as well as the limits of that stuff. So saying rather than I just want to like carve out my piece of the city in Girl by Moonlight, it really is about fighting magical monsters, etc., that are symbolic of the kind of oppressive crap of society that you are trying to work against and overcome, and hopefully at the end of the day change or transform for the better.
And Brandon.
I think before I really get into the meat of what I think is distinct about Sound Clash, I think Andrew touches on a thing that I think is part of the reason why I dig Blades a lot in the first place, which is that All of its mechanics lean very heavily into the idea that the world that you live in is dark and oppressive, and you do what you must in order to make your own room in that space. And the world will keep telling you, no, that's not enough. We're still going to punish you. And you kind of figure out how you're going to deal with that. Which is like the thing that I gravitated to most about Blades in the Dark. But when I started working on Soundclash, when I started trying to figure out what actually works in terms of a system for the game that I wanted to make, because I had that idea first, I wanted to figure out how to make it like intense afterward. Part of why I gravitated to Blades is that those same mechanics are very good at talking about how industries, especially creative industries, can be really cruel to creators, while also therefore giving those creators an opportunity to say, I'ma get mine, and ask the question of, well, what does it actually mean for you to try to do the work necessary for you to succeed? And how does that impact other people in that space? And asking the player to actually think about those things, which is, I think, the thing that matters to me the most. As well as, I just like the idea of taking premises that have combat or that lean very heavy on combat and try to ask questions of, well, what other kinds of combat can there be? Which is why, like, there are the majority of play in Soundclash is actually not actually getting into altercations with other people, but you go on stage and you perform, and the world changes based on how well that performance goes, which I really dig.
Those are both really deep and thoughtful answers, and makes mine feel kind of shallow. I looked at Blades and I wondered if you could run it as a one-shot, because there's so many things in Blades that depend on a continuity basically being built. So I was like, well, I mean, you'd have to throw out trauma, and you'd have to throw out heat, and you'd have to throw out all of these other things. Then the question became, how many things can you take out of Blades and still have it be recognizable as Blades in the Dark? And that's how Heist was born. A hypothetical question about how many things can I put in the trash before it's not this thing anymore.
Mm-hmm. You actually made the ship of Theseus. Yeah. You succeeded.
I did. I made the ship of Theseus, but it's a tabletop game.
Yeah.
Alright, so we've talked about all of these things about how our games are different from Blades and things that we took away, added, etc. But why go with Blades in the first place to create this game when you could have made your, well, I mean, that's a whole other monumental task, made your own system, used a different base underworking skeleton. So Brandon, tell me a little bit why Blades?
I like Blades because the experience of playing Blades makes it really fun for the world to just kick you while you're down. All of the individual mechanics that kind of lock in place in Blades to create the experience of this harsh, cruel, oppressive world that you're in, where all you have are kind of your wits and the people that you're working with, is one, exactly the kind of drama that I dig a lot, and two, they work very well externally in ways that make it very easy to know that the decisions that you make have very real, very high stakes, even if the payoff for those stakes is still several sessions in the future. You still know you've made a decision that has consequences, and that consequence is coming. And when it comes, it's gonna be very intense. You're gonna have to deal with it. And I like all of those things. In particular, I'm very fond of heat and entanglements, because it means that every time you do something, you know that the world has changed. It's not just you have gained a benefit, you are aware of the fact that other people have noticed what you've done. It's going to change the relationship that those people have with you. You're going to have to deal with the fallout of your relationship changing with people that you haven't even met yet, or people who you thought you were cool with before but didn't know that this thing that you did is not something that they like. And having to juggle all of those balls at once is very intense for a play session, but also it means that everybody knows that there are multiple options for where to go next. All of those things are weighty and have like very solid impact, and they just get to decide, well, what's the thing that we do, what's the thing that we want to do now? Do we want to clean up this mess that we made in the business of trying to get successfully getting this score? Do we want to close in on another score so we can shore up some of the benefits that we've already had? Do we want to lay low? Do we want to do a favor for a friend? Those things are kind of really neat.
Andrew.
Yeah, so I mean, there are so many angles to come at this from, but I think for me, I really like structured play. I like the feeling of momentum that it develops, and since I wanted to have a kind of a game that imposed or encouraged a sort of editorial mindset on the players of saying, we're going to stick to the most essential bits of play, and we're not going to, spend 20 hours of, RPG sessions just chewing the scenery and getting through our first, step on our journey. I kind of wanted to keep the game moving and keep momentum. This idea of like phases of play and being able to move things along through a structure within the game was really, really helpful to bring in from Blades and to adapt for my own purposes. And the juxtaposition of a lot of what Brandon was talking about, of like the game system permitting, one player to just come in and say like, cool, this person just like murders you outright and you're dead now. What do you do? Of just like the world being able to be really, really incisive, and then the players being able to push back really hard against that, was also very, very fitting for the kind of like tragic stories that I wanted to tell, emphasizing this idea of the characters coming into contact with very, very dangerous or dire situations and just barely scraping by, or banding together and finding the kind of solidarity or whatever that they need to overcome these challenges. It feels a lot more impactful to tell stories about hope when basically when you start at the point of things already being the worst they possibly can be, and then you build your hope out of that, rather than saying, we just really want things to be nice, and we get that. It doesn't really sell that emotional experience of hope, which requires that there be this big, heavy, bad thing that you're hoping against. And so it really helped. That contrast really, really helps, I think, make the game grab people by the heartstrings in the ways that I wanted it to really deliver these kinds of stories. But yeah, I just was sick of, in my own experience of playing games, I'm just sick of like waiting for people to finish talking about things that aren't productive. I don't know. It's like it's not a great attitude. I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but like sometimes I think I'll do this too, where I start talking about a thing and it's pure navel gazing, and like I love having a game with a little more structure that can just say like, okay, cool, let's move on. Like if we really need to come back to that, or if it's really important, it'll keep coming up, and we can just keep playing, and we can play to see what's interesting, and follow through on all these other principles that we all often uphold as players of games, but that I think can easily get lost in the messiness of a live experience. And I think having rules act as a sort of taskmaster for play can be beneficial. Not that I want to just step on everyone's toes or anything, but there's something there about just like keeping stuff moving, encouraging people to curate and choose the stuff that really matters and keep things moving, I think is really, really valuable as well.
The notes that I had written down were once again purely mechanical. I'm bad at math, so I just didn't want to do math of the math of rolling and figuring out like, okay, well, if they use D4s, it's too small of a range, and I mean, D6s are easily available at most places. You could probably grab some at a dollar store if it's a big enough dollar store. You only need 2 of them for your entire group to play for most of this game. And it let me just focus on the whole design process instead of how to make the game work and function the way that it's supposed to. And I just like the format of the rules. I like if you don't have the ability to do something, if you don't have points in whatever stat, you can still try it. You're probably going to be bad at it, but you can still try it. And that was really good. But then, as you've been talking, I realized, like, the structure was also important. In Heist, there are clocks that every single time you roll will keep moving forward as the antagonists are coming, like, racing behind you, will catch up. Even if you roll double sixes. Actually, no. If you roll double sixes, that's the only time that someone will not pursue you, which is so rare that almost every roll you make, someone is closing in on you. And that helps a lot with keeping the game moving forward and progressing, and sometimes making really good, interesting conflict, because I've seen games where the first, 3 rolls, everyone just bombs it completely, which means they're caught in maybe the planning stage of their heists. And then you have to figure out what to do. And sometimes there's really interesting things that come from that. But the game forces you to move forward all the time. Which is... I probably made that because I was also tired of people just going on and on. If I'm watching an actual play stream. It's this is a really good story, but I'm falling asleep. I've started playing solitaire on my phone. I'm really sorry. Oh, my cat's here, I'm gonna hold him. That kind of thing constantly happening in a game is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So you make a game that you can't do that.
As you all said that, suddenly a thing dawned on me that I had never really thought about before, because I guess my story brain just kind of always internalizes this thing. But I've been reading a lot of this book called Dramatica, A Theory of Story, for working on my own writing process and stuff like that. And one of the questions they ask about how you form a story is what the story limit is, which is are you running out of time or are you running out of options? Because that's how we're going to propel to the next scene. Either something is happening very soon and you have to deal with it immediately, or something is happening right now and you have to figure out how to use the only tools that you have. And one of the things that I'm realizing I like about Blades now is it's always both a lack of time and a lack of options. Because once you make a decision in that universe, everybody is going to make their own decisions all at once, and you're going to have to deal with those decisions at some point. So there's never a point where and this is not me speaking down to other games. Everybody enjoys their own thing, but it's very easy in another game to have done a thing that is supposed to have stakes, and then you go back to your base, and all of you eat dinner, and stop and think, we don't have anything to do now, do we? We're fine. We've succeeded. There is no mechanical need for us to be worrying right now. In Blades, you always have a mechanical need to worry. The game is always going, oh, you did something? Someone somewhere did not like that. And it means that you always have it, the decisions that you always have to make are always urgent. So there's never a point where you can say, well, we don't have to do anything right now, because the longer you wait, the more consequences you're going to pile up.
Yeah. Yep. Blades and a lot of the games derive from it always have up in the corner, X will remember that.
Yeah.
Just constantly going all the time.
Yeah.
Have you done something? Someone will remember that.
That's the entire Fatchen game. Someone will remember that.
Yeah. Okay. So, we've talked about what we've taken from Blades, what we've used to build up our games. So, was there anything anywhere in your games that you decided to not go that greatly affected what the game ended up becoming. Like for me, for Heist, I really, really thought that stress was going to be a mechanic that everyone had to worry about. You would build it up over the game and then somehow it would like explode outward and affect everything. Because it's a really good currency to use in game to like to keep the action moving forward, to make sure that something always is happening. But as I watched a lot of action movies, as I watched a bunch of heist movies, I realized that like stress and injury and harm and all those things that I thought needed to be in Blades to make it still Blades didn't really need to be, as long as you had something to make up for it. Something to like have that big final moment, which is what I actually wanted from Blades. And if you give someone a resource and you tell them that it's limited in any way, and because it's a one shot, there's no way to get rid of it, they're just going to hoard it, and no one will take any chances. So that's how I came up with the cinematic death mechanic. You just have full stress all the time, and eventually you can do your very last thing at any point during the game to propel things forward.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, what about Girl by Moonlight? Where's somewhere you thought it was gonna go, and it didn't, and it changed the entire game?
Well, the really facile answer to this question is that initially I was fiddling around with doing some like PBTA, kind of more traditional PBTA stuff, and obviously that is not where I went, and I threw that out very early. But there's like a very small prototype of the game that's just like an Apocalypse World hack, or a couple of moves, anyways, at least. But I think the thing that really sticks out to me in my hindsight, looking at the process of development, was this little kernel that snuck in early on and was unexamined for a very long time of just, I was like, cool, you're magical girls and you're fighting against the darkness of society. And it was this like really tropic, really flat little thing of being like, yeah, there's bad stuff, whatever. And that I use this word darkness a lot in this idea. And this stuck in the game for almost its whole lifespan without me really giving it a second thought. And um, I was fortunate enough to see some people talking on Twitter. I cannot remember who specifically it was, but I believe it was a black fiction writer from the States, talking about this, how they like see the darkness as like a recurring trope all the time in young adult fiction or video games or whatever else, and how much it annoys them to see it, and how it is like tied up in a lot of weird racial stuff, or like colorism stuff, and just like the more and more I read this, the more I was like, oh, okay, this sucks, this has to go, I need to get rid of this thing in my game that like isn't good. I'm not attached to it because it's good, or attached to it really. It's just been sitting there unexamined, and that this is something that could, push people away from the game or make people have a bad time playing it, and also just, again, is very like flat and non-evocative. And so I ended up uprooting all of that language and replacing it with stuff that was more specific to each series playset. Like each little module of the game now has its own antagonism that is more tightly defined, that is more evocative of the themes of that playset, that makes sense internally, and that in going back and retracing my steps and reworking through all of that, I feel like I greatly improved the caliber of the writing in the game. And so it was not simply a matter of repairing a deficit or solving like an accessibility issue within the game, of saying like, yeah, this is a thing that makes it harder for people who aren't white to play my game because they have to push through the friction of seeing this word and all the baggage associated with it. Sure, fine. Obviously, we want to get rid of that. But then also that it pushed me to then find ways to make the game better, to go from like a neutral state to a better state, rather than just from a bad state to a neutral state. And so it ended up being pretty significant, just as an experience for me as a designer of this game, to be like, hey, any kind of consideration like this, where it's something from outside of my kind of frame of reference that I can draw on and correct for or whatever, is not only an opportunity to invite other people in, but it's also always going to result in me making this thing better and putting in work that's going to improve the game for everyone who's playing it. And so, yeah, weird little oversight like that I ended up catching that stuck with me in a big way.
And Brandon.
Before I begin, I would just like to let Andrew know, as both a writer and someone who plays games, thank you.
I did it for you, Brandon.
Because that's a big pet peeve of mine as well. But that's another conversation. As to the question, it's a very when I made this change to Sound Clash, it was very minor because it was a thing that I was debating about the system for a while, based on things that I wanted the game to do, but I hadn't settled on it until I started playtesting, which was I wanted to balance the good math that Blades already has in terms of its dice pools, and my own very personal desire to always throw lots of big shiny objects at the table, with the desire for the dice system to do something that I thought was something that I wanted in particular, that I thought was very radical and very silly, which was I wanted to create a circumstance where someone can succeed with consequences. In a kind of thematic way, because music is the through line of Sound Clash. I thought about this mechanic called straining, which means that whenever you roll higher than the highest possible success, you still gain the benefits of that extreme success, but something bad now happens very immediately. Because I thought that would be cool and tense, and it speaks to that kind of comic image that we have in our favorite cartoons and television shows of the opera singer belting out at their very highest, and then all of the glass shatters in the room. What if you do so well that doing so well starts creating more problems because you didn't have to overdo it? And that led to me realizing that there's a way that I can actually give players more choice in how they want to engage with randomness. So the scale on which one can roll still allows for failure to be at a certain low digit portion of a roll, and success to be a certain high portion of a roll. But whenever you're rolling a skill, whenever you're rolling an action, you get to decide whether you're rolling a d20, where all of the numbers are on the die and the possibility for you to strain is right there, just like everything else, or a d12, where perhaps you won't strain. The chances of you straining are significantly smaller, but depending on the amount of dots that you have, that might still go up by a number of points, and you might still end up getting to that point. And that made all of the ways in which you engage with actions so much more interesting, because one, players are always given the choice of how much they want to commit to doing something very extravagant, or just settling for an average success because all they need to do is make sure that the thing is done and not make a scene. But it also means that if you have no dots in an action, you have to roll 2 d20s and take whichever is more catastrophic between a failure and straining. Which is a lot of fun, because it means that you can do very well with no dots and something bad will still happen, and that's very engaging, I've realized, and I want to lean into that even more.
Yeah, and the way that builds on your theme of being as a performer and as a larger than life personality or whatever.
Yeah,
I love that synergy between those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
That's so good.
Because a lot of the world building is also that magic has entered your universe very recently in the setting of the game, which is still very nebulous, because I've written the rules in such a way that you get to determine how that happened and what that setting is, but it's always happened very recently. So nobody knows how magic works, and it's still very volatile and very nebulous. So a lot of how the game works is you get to tap into this very powerful magical essence. It's going to go poorly. Maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah. The very idea of how many times have we looked at like celebrity news or whatever and been like, they're just doing too much. Maybe if you didn't do too much,
Yeah,
all of these things wouldn't happen. But having it in a game is kind of revolutionary.
yeah. One of the things that I've discovered in the act of running games, especially, is that people who have probably never thought about the entertainment industry as a space where like actual people live and work, start empathizing more with the fact that sometimes these things are not their fault, and things just kind of spiraled out of control, and that just kind of happened mechanically, and I love that.
Okay. So now for probably one of the hardest questions on my little list. Was there an aspect of Blades that you guys really wanted to explore, but ultimately decided against, and why? So, Brandon, you get to start.
Not so much didn't want to explore, but I'm exploring much differently and much more kindly than Core Blades does, and that's trauma. I like Blades. I like trauma in Blades. I like how urgent it makes your response to being triggered by an event. I like how it has the capacity to hinder your group in terms of numbers, because once you've hit your last stress, you now need to leave and recover, because that's what normal people have to do. But in Sound Clash, it felt kind of scummy, personally, to be like, you have now suffered this like hostile experience that is a direct result of the industry being cruel to you, and it is permanent, and you can do nothing about it. Which, on one hand, I think that there is value in confronting the ways in which trauma affects our ability to live and work. But I didn't want it to be that. I didn't want it to be this static. Well, you either invoke it and it does terrible things to your ability to live and work, or it isn't invoked. So I've been experimenting with a mechanic called therapy, which is just recovery for trauma, where you start a clock and literally talk to someone. It can be a professional, it can be your friend, it can be somebody else who's going through the same thing that you have. And at the end of that process, the game master, the stage manager of the game, asks you a question about how you've resolved that moment in terms of your trauma, and that ticks your clock, and then your trauma condition changes into a recovery condition, and instead of invoking trauma for negative effects, you get the opportunity to invoke recovery for potential positive effects.
Solving the Kanye problem.
Yeah, what if we get to solve the
Kanye
Kanye problem? Oh my god.
I'm sorry.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Just think. For me with Heist, harm was one of the last things that I took out from Blades to make Heist. Because I mean, like, you watch any action movie, people get hurt, people get harmed and injured, and they might, like, if you look at like the Fast and the Furious, people will crawl out of car wrecks with terrible injuries, and like will jump cars off of cliffs and sky rises and things, and they'll get hurt. But then I started realizing that hurt doesn't do anything in the next maybe for the next like handful of minutes, but that's it. And then they're fine. When you see them again, they might have a band-aid or like bandages wrapped around them. They might like hold their stomach a little bit and hunch slightly, but that's it. That's the extent that it ever really goes to in an action movie. And I was like, well, if I'm trying to make something that feels like an action-y heist movie, I guess I have to get rid of harm. You can't have lasting consequences on your person. Even though that feels like the thing that fits most and tells the most stories. Like, what are, from like all of your exploits, what is stuck with you? But the answer in a movie is nothing. Nothing really sticks with you. It's you, your goal, the things that get in your way, and the people that maybe try to stop you. And by the end, you probably get your goal in some way, shape, or form that may or may not be what you actually want, but that's it. So as I'm trying to build this one-shot experience, I realized that I was taking out more and more things that felt like they should be right, but weren't right for a one-shot or weren't right for trying to make action feel like action. And in the end, it actually propelled a lot more players to take far, far bigger consequences than they would have if they were like, okay, well, I have to calculate how much harm I'm taking here if I don't roll double sixes here so that the antagonist can't catch up to us 3 steps from, or scenes from now. It's like, no, I want to do something big and explosive. And if I'm really bad at this role, I've got a cinematic death. It'll help out everyone, and I can just pick up the next player, like, sheet card, fill it out really quick while everyone's talking, and someone will pull me in the next scene. And it took the brakes off of so many proverbial cars that ended up being the best thing that I could have done. So, Andrew.
Yeah, so it's the one big piece that because I look at my game as being, like a hack of Blades, and my general approach or thought process around hacking a game is that you don't want to, if you're trying to make something that is similar in scope, you do not want to remove elements without replacing them with something. I kind of went in with the assumption that like Blades is a good game because it has an appropriate amount of elements doing an appropriate set of things and that are interdependent upon each other and are load bearing to some extent or another. And so I was very hesitant to like remove stuff without putting something else in its place. But the one that I think ended up being where I pulled out a thing that is kind of numerically oriented and very crunchy and then replaced it with a very abstracted kind of floaty idea was the whole kind of faction hierarchy, this way of representing the territorial kind of nature of the city and like what is available to be claimed, and also the discrete setting that Blades has of being specific. It's in a specific place with all these specific people, and so in my game instead I went with this totally procedurally generated, world where the players all collaboratively make it and fill it with antagonism and to a certain extent kind of author their own antagonism to then be piloted by the director. But there isn't this kind of pecking order or tiering of things and different factions and stuff. There's kind of one broadly unified opposition, and then the crew itself kind of facing off against them. And so I ended up kind of rebuilding some sort of more crunchy opposition stuff with some of the playsets, but ultimately kind of shed this whole idea of the layer cake or whatever you want to call it of factional politics, because it just didn't end up. I didn't find a way to elegantly solve that or like square that circle, solve that problem. Which I don't know if I regret necessarily, but it's definitely like a thing that I was trying to plug away at and eventually ended up just dropping, for a kind of more generalized solution. Not that I'm unhappy with it or anything. I keep sounding like I'm lamenting, but yeah, like it was something that I really hammered against and couldn't find a ton of ways to incorporate it that I would be happy with. So I ended up shedding.
And we have 10 minutes left. all I have left on my list is outros. So I'm going to answer this question from chat real quick.
Great.
So, removing harm as a debilitating mechanic is good, but what about making it motivational? A lot of the mechanics that make blades were rolled into about 4 things. So, you have a hall, or you roll on 3 tables to make your setting for heist. So there's no setting. You build it in the moment as you're making your characters and doing everything. So you roll a hall, which is the thing that you're trying to steal, a location for where it is, and your antagonist. And then every playbook, every set of archetypes in the game has a cornerstone, something that's important to them and why they're even trying to do this mission. So, like, if you're doing a guts mission, which is a race to the finish, you might be getting a street sign that reads wrong way from a famous city intersection, and the antagonists coming after you are a former partner who just did a stint in prison. And if you're playing the tactician, who's like the person that knows everything, has everything on a timetable, knows the entire plan and how it's supposed to go, they lost someone who was following their orders in spite of all of their planning. Who were they? What happened? And the question that kind of implicitly follows that is, what are you doing differently this time to keep them safe? Or to keep everyone safe so you don't lose that person again. Let's see, and another quick question, which we can answer in like a couple of minutes. How did you know how many playbooks was the right number for your game?
It's just always arbitrarily 7, and I will take no further clarification on this matter. 7.
I am actually jealous of you for having an answer because Soundclash, by definition, has kind of dug itself a hole in that its character playbooks and its band sheets are its band sheets are actually very, very large. In that there are entire genres of music I don't have sheets for yet because there's so much music. But the character playbooks, actually, I was very fortunate enough to lock into certain archetypes of sound. That there's the rhythm, the melody, the harmony, and the beat, who all are functionally supposed to do things to the song that they're playing. And as a result, regardless of what instrument they play, that is how they engage with that thing. That's how we create distinction between individual instruments, because those instruments might do different things depending on which playbook you are, or how those things come together in a specific band organization. Which was like, I kind of lucked into that, because otherwise I would have created a playbook for every instrument that can be played, and that would probably not have been as fun.
Just to give a real answer to this, I think like there is a version of Blades in the Dark that has one character playbook where you're just everyone's a scoundrel, right? Like the divisions are always arbitrary, and so it's about the identifying elements that really matter. Like I think Brandon's solution for his game was brilliant, right? To just say, these elements of music are what I'm going to build my playbooks out of. That it should, I think, flow from other ideas, other principles, because it's always an arbitrary delineation. And it's just a matter of finding a way to line that up with something else in the game that's going to feel harmonious.
For me, really quick for heist, 4 primary sets, 3 secondary sets, 12 playbooks, 1 playbook for I don't know how to play tabletop games, and 1 playbook for I know how to play tabletop games, I'm trying something different this time. That's how I came up with my number of playbooks. So really quick, let's do some outros. Andrew, where can people find you, and where can they find Girl by Moonlight?
So you can follow me on Twitter at Commuting Crow, and by way of that, you can kind of keep an eye on what I'm working on and the projects that exist. Girl by Moonlight is being published by Evil Hat Publishing. At some point in the future, you can buy it, but not now.
Alright, Brandon, what about you? And Soundclash.
Hi, everybody. Brandon O'Brien here. You can find me on Twitter at The Rising Tides. That's TITHES. Soundclash does not physically exist yet. A lot of it is still presently in development. But you can see me playtest the elements that presently exist on twitch.tv/Arvan Eleron. That's ARVAN ELERON. Where me and a crew of all BIPOC players test out the game, figure out what parts don't work, and have a lot of fun revealing that the world that they live in is actually a capitalist hellscape that they can only destroy by being as punk as possible. Our next session is upcoming sometime in November, but if you follow me on Twitter, you'll find out exactly when that is.
And I'm Allie Bushton. I'm on Twitter at twitter.com/madpiro. Why did I say all of that like I'm writing a link? At madpiro, that's PIERROT. Heist, you can find the playtest on itch at madpiro.itch.io/heist in all caps, because sometimes it doesn't come up if you don't put it in all caps. It might get published somewhere by someone at some point in the future that isn't me. But I don't know yet, because I'm creating through the past 2 years at high speeds, and I don't know what's happening anymore. But thanks for coming. We'll be hanging out in the post-panel chat until we can't anymore. We'll answer some more of the questions that came in. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, y'all.